again. Singing with lovely. If you could kneel with me, we'll have a silent prayer. Amen.
Amen.
Before we journey to 1989,
Ile tatula ingira kwamba 1999
I wanted to add one other point.
nala lundapo chikomona chimwe.
Another reason that we know that this subject is gender
Mulandu umbi tuishibirako kutira ekisambirirwa pe kiripo ni gender.
but not just gender, marriage.
Ukana zane kutira
Between 1888 and this history,
ali gender na marriage
what
pakati
is being discussed is the two institutions of Eden.
kanshi finti fya twaisho kusambirirapo apa mulandu apa institution yabiri.
1888 was the institution of the Sabbath.
Kanshi mu 1888 yashiri ali pali institution ili sabata.
Our history is this institution of marriage.
Kanshi muri yashiri Yesu
We choose to correctly understand marriage.
nipa mulandu wa chupo.
And I'll leave it with a question that I won't answer for you.
Kanshi nimbikeri pushorio kuli kwasuka.
What institution was under threat or a subject in point 3?
Kanshi pachikoma chalenga butatu institution ishi ali mu busanzu
History, slavery.
Mirala history pamulandu wa
So
slavery.
1888, we know it's Sabbath. Our own, we know it's marriage.
Kanshi ngati shibokutira umoni yali lisabata munsta Yesu ni
And
pachupo.
that is what affected Eve.
Ero efi nefi akumine
It
kuli
was the marriage that was affected.
kanshi mukuli hivi cha kwetu obusanso ni
So
pachupo.
it's affected women married and unmarried.
Kanshi cha kumine pabana kashi elio chupo.
Every facet of their lives, thousands of years.
Nero na kupinja fyonse fya pachupo chao miaka yonse.
Headship was still an issue, a breakdown of marriage.
Kanshi ubumuto bwamwe umebwali yali lyashi mulandu wa
So I wanted
chupo.
to just put in a fourth point about that institution.
Kanshi ndefo kubikapo chikomo chimo pali icho.
So behind me exists our reform line.
Kanshi kunu mayandi uku uli mushiro wako bukuluka wesu.
It's not all drawn neatly as far as it takes.
Kanshi tauli fyatu fyonse fye efyo fili.
The reason for that is the dates are not even years apart.
Ancho mulandu palicho
Sometimes I just need to get a lot more information in.
Kachi pa mulandu ndefo kuwika po ncho.
So I hope that doesn't complicate it for anyone.
Muli
So we know that homosexuality has existed for a long time.
We're
going to go into ancient history at a later date. Maybe tomorrow. But just, I guess, a few words of introduction. There was never really a word homosexuality. There was different words to describe the act. But there was no word to describe that type of relationship. The word homosexuality first introduced in 1868.
Issue with homosexual, the Abadila Popular 1968.
So it wasn't until the late 1800s, the latter half of the 1800s, that there was a word for this.
Kanshi ukukonzeta kwa issue mpaka fie kukupwa kwa univa 1800 yero kwa sang issue ili abikwa kweli akutira homosexual.
Elder Cumming has already discussed some of that when he's talked about sodomy.
Chikupira paminda ali esho kwikatako kuli fie anda pali chisambiliro.
But towards the late 1800s, early 1900s, people became more open.
Anchi mkupwa kwa 1800 na mkutendeka kwa 1900 abantu batendeka okusaparwala.
Especially in the 1920s.
Na kuchirisha mu myaka ya 1920.
People who were homosexual or lesbian were more open without much fear of persecution.
Abantu abalinga ba homosexual nangwa ama lesbian batendeka okuisa parwala kwa blokutina sana okupakaswa.
It didn't last long.
No mechi tachatwalirire. Instead.
And persecution really drove them into hiding in the 1930s.
Anshi okupakaswa ekwa batwere mu ukuleka bafisame.
Then you had World War II.
Muniba 1930 ero twakwata obulu bwa chalo chonso bwa kibiri.
And then after World War II you had the Cold War.
Ero kabiri panuma ya bulu bwa chalo chonso bwa kibiri twakwata obulu bwa mumashiwi.
Many of us are familiar with the persecutions in the United States of homosexuals during the Cold War.
Ero abenge amuli foto alikwata okwiruka okupakaswa kwa kitika pali ba homosexual mu state ilo kwali obulu bwa mumashiwi.
Especially in the McCarthy era.
Na kuchirisha munshita isho.
So around the 50s and 60s there was a lot of persecution.
Kanshina tukwata mu myaka ya 1950s na 60s okupakaswa kalamu.
People were driven out of their jobs, sometimes to suicide.
Abantu abengi bale batampya matto yabo ero kitashimono kuyipa yabene. Kuyikulika.
They would face entrapment by the police.
Ero bale kwata nguchushiwa no kwikatwa kuli ba polisi.
In general, it was a time of great persecution.
And in June of
1969, that community felt on edge.
So when
the police raided the Stonewall Inn, they expected it to be like every other raid.
baina balesubira okutira yala afe ninstyle ine ngevyo abachitali yonse.
Push their way in, arrest some people, beat some people up.
Bayingira mulya bayikatamo bamo basunka n'okufumamo bamo.
But by this stage, the community felt they could take no more.
Gero pali insta urulukwa lwayishiremo n'okutira awe kyakiramu.
And someone began to fight back.
Era omwo atendeke okulwa.
This started a series of protests.
Iki kyatendeke feno
From
kutandika
1969
forward,
a movement developed.
Kanisho kufuma mu mwaka wa 1969 ikicubungwe kyatendeka kuya
where they
kumita.
refused to quietly continue to take the persecution and stigma.
Batendeke okutalika kupakasokwa kutida tatwatwalira okulaya pakaswefe.
But our core subject is marriage.
Lero ekisambiriro kyesu pochintirire ni pachupo.
And gay marriage was not part of the agenda or conversation in 1969.
Kanshi ifyupo fyaba nensu amage tafyali chimo pali fyalengere mu 1969.
Same-sex marriage rarely attracted mainstream attention.
Ifyupo fya kupana aba nensu aba tafyali fyaleletwa ku bantu kulanda pasana.
Until they say the late 1980s.
Kano fe kufika ku stereo chashefika mukupwa kwa ba 1990.
The New York Times said,
New York Times yena yalandirefi,
the question of same-sex marriage was all but dormant until the late 1980s.
Ekisambiriro kyakulanda pa ifyupo fyaba nensu tafyalelandwako mpaka fe kukupwa kwa ba 1900.
When, according to gay activists, the AIDS epidemic was a turning point.
Okufika fena konsteo ilio ubulwele bwa AIDS
All of a sudden, they had questions of inheritance and death benefits.
Ilio kwaba ichakupiani na ilo nomfwa isha ambo kutumbuka mulifu.
So they're going to want to, once you know you're going to lose someone.
Kanshi finshi fyala chitika pacho baraji tubalefwa ya tabalefo kulufya pomu.
The status of the relationship and the way you view that relationship.
Ekisambiriro kya mabwampano eryo nefyo mulolesha pale ya mabwampano.
The connection you have with them.
Hello, mabwampano uwo mwakwatana beno.
Or the way that you want to be remembered after death.
Ero munshirana yoyo ya kutira washara waibukishiwa panu mayamfwa.
The way that you want to remember the people that you love after death.
Ero ne finto fyonga kwato kwibukishapo pali yomutemu kwa panu manafwa.
It feels much more important.
Awo chena chilo mfuika ichikankala sana.
So when this epidemic began,
kanshilio ubulwele bwatendeke.
It did over time turn many people's minds to the subject of marriage. So that played one part in changing the things they were fighting for. But it still was given very little mainstream attention. And even many within the homosexual community were not interested in the subject. Until 1989 acted as a turning point.
Mpaka fe ilio mwaka wa 1989 waishire banga apa alukire no kuchinjisha fintu yonse. Kanshi kwali fintu fingi fyatitike mwaka wa 1989.
Going to start outside the United States.
Naratendekera kunse ya chao cha Amerika.
Can you still hear me? Has the audio just softened? So, the starting point for the fight for gay marriage began in 1989.
Kanshi uhuru ukalamba sana bwakuluisha pachupo chaba nensuba mage
Quite a number of
1989
events that happened in that year.
kanshi mwali pintu fyatitike sana muri uya mwaka
That really gave impetus to this movement.
ifipela amaka kuli
Going
movement
to start outside the United States,
kanshi nalatendekera kunse ya chao cha America
in Europe,
nalaya ku Europe
Denmark.
muchalo cha Denmark.
This was the first country in the world
kanshi chi echalo chakubalira po mwisonde lyonse
to allow registered partnerships.
okusuminisha amabwa mpano ayasuminishiwa
For the translators that have a list of quotes,
kubaleta pula bakwete ipepala yama
we're
lembo
going to go to that document and read.
twala kulirwe pepala nokuberenga.
It's titled A Triumph for Love in Denmark.
kanshi umutwe ikwete yandokutira okuchimfya kwa chitemwiko mu Denmark.
And this is from the Time magazine book released in 2009.
Ero fyafuma mwibuku lya Time magazine lya perwe mu
So for
2009
those that aren't aware what Time magazine did in 2009,
kanshi kuli abo abashishi becho Time magazine yachitire mu 2009
it's on the 20th anniversary of 1989, they released a book.
kanshi mukusefya kwa myaka 29 iyo bafumisha libuku
To try and illustrate for people how significant this year was.
kukwesha okulanga abantu ifyo uyu
And
mwaka
we're going to read from that book.
wali ukankala sana kulanga abantu twalaberenga mulirwe buku.
This page section of the book is called The Triumph for Love in Denmark.
kanshi chipandwa cha mulirwe buku tuleberenga ni ukuchimfya kwa chitemwiko
It
mu
was
Denmark.
October 1st, 1989, and dressed in matching suits, Axel and Eigil had just become the first gay couple in the world to legalize their union.
kanshi alini pa October 1 mu 1989 umo kabiri kwali ukufuala ngelyo mumasuti uyu Axel Elena Egel bakwete ukusanga
Today, that
ukubapamo
photograph hangs on the
muchupo
wall of 94-year-old Axel's Copenhagen apartment amid a crop of houseplants. His husband, Eigil, has been dead for 14 years.
okuba muchupo mkuwa kubairapo mushonde lyonse kanshi lero abakukopa abo ifikope fyaba pa chibumba cha uyumayo cha uyu muntu ukwete nombe myaka 94 umkote
But Axel still remembers the wedding as if it were yesterday.
nangulo mulume wakwe ena alifwa ni myaka apa yapita po
More than
14 lero
anything, he remembers the crowd. I'd never seen so many television cameras. There were journalists there from all over the world. He says it wasn't until that moment that we realized the historic significance of what we were doing.
lero ena alebukisha pali fyonse ichi achitike pali bula bushikubo baleupa kuteta kuli chimbi icho njibukisha sana kutira palichi elio ati kwali ifyakukope fingi.
The article goes on then to explain that Denmark wasn't particularly tolerant towards homosexuals.
Elio kulingana nelia shiria rondoro kutira au Denmark tayari iya kushusha no kulisha sana.
Persecuted and lost his job.
Elio yu acto alikwete okupaka sono kulufya nchito yakwe.
But two things happened.
Tayari na yeye anaka muri
both caused by AIDS.
yali yako salero kuli ifyo efyatumbwikemu efyaleterera
First,
efyapala
it made
HIV.
conservatives think that it might be good to support stable, monogamous relationships among homosexuals.
Kanshi ukulosha kuli icho chupo okusumisha mu Denmark mukubalirapo fye.
And second, it brought homosexuals into the public sphere.
Eryo kabiri cha bubiri tekusuminisha fye chupo kyasuminisha lero yakiretere na
For the
kuleta
first time,
palwalala.
politicians were actually meeting gay men and lesbian women and realizing they weren't any different from straight people.
Ichakubalira kuba politician bambo okumona abantu mu fyupu efi fyamage kutira tabali abakusana fye muli fyonse.
So the first of the significant changing events
Kanshi fyumo fyakubalira po fyatike kabiri chikankara
was in Denmark.
fyali ni mu Denmark.
It's not marriage, it's a registered partnership.
Kanshi apata chali chupo lero kulembesha kwa mubwa mpano.
It did not have all the rights of marriage.
Kanshi tachali chakwata isambushonse sha chupo.
For example, they could not adopt children.
Ichakubalira po tetibakwate okusenda abana.
Back into the United States.
Twabwerera mu kyalo kya America.
On July 6, 1989, in New York City.
Kanshi July 6 mwaka 1980.
Now this one might take a little explanation.
Kanshi chikuti chakwata okulondolo shubunono.
But after World War II, New York City had rent-controlled apartments.
Anuma ya bulubwa chibiri bwesonde lyonse chichiputulwa cha New York chakwata okula control ifiputulwa ifya fingi.
So if me and my husband had a rent-controlled apartment,
Kanshi nena mulume wandi nga chakobati
that
natukwata
rent is capped, so
chutulesonkera.
they can't charge me more.
Kanshi kuputulako ishakusonkera shimoteti basonkeshe shingi.
And these rent-controlled apartments are quite precious. People want them.
Kanshi ukuputulako kwa misonko kwali kwawamisha abantu baleka birokukwata.
So if my husband signed the lease for this apartment,
Kanshi umulume wandi nga chakutira ewa sainapo palichi
and
chakusonkera.
he dies,
Eryo afwa.
the law stated that I could take over that lease and it would still be rent controlled.
Ifundi lyalandira okutira nebo newashala nemukashi kuti nakwata ile pepa layo nakwata kutungulula
I wouldn't
ekiyeriyo.
be thrown out of my home and need to go find a much more expensive apartment.
Itina tamshiwa mwakwikala omu.
So
Kabiri
this is from the LA
nokwata sonkera.
Times, 1989.
Kanshi nichirefuma ni paper lelyo 19.
New York's highest
89.
court ruled Thursday that a partner in a long-term homosexual relationship can take over the couple's rent-controlled apartment when the lover who signed the lease dies.
Kanshi chiputulwa cha mu New York icha lero sha ifundira lero sha kulichi. Okutira uwa mubwa mpano wa homosexual
In
mubwa
doing so,
mpano nga
the court
chakutira
expanded the definition of a family as it applies to New York's rent-controlled laws.
ali mubwa mpano kuti akwate okusenda chile cha lesonkera mu umwakwikala umwina mwako wafwa.
Fourth paragraph down.
Mukuchitefyo ikoti
The
ya
decision marks the first time any top state court in the nation has recognized a gay couple to be the legal equivalent of a family. American Civil Liberties Union lawyer William Rubenstein said.
eryo muri ifunde lili ashikirwe lya shilingisha fyapa buto kutile umuku wakubalirapo gutira koti yapa mulu ili yonse mulu muchalo.
First time such a court in the United States has recognized them as family.
bakwata okwishiba n'okusuminisha ifyupo fy'abanenso amage okulingana fena abantu aba mu America.
Today's decision is a groundbreaking victory for lesbians and gay men, Rubenstein said. It marks the most important single step forward in American law toward legal recognition of lesbian and gay relationships.
Kanshi lero uli obusalo bwapangirwe bwali kyakukinfye kyakukyapa kubalira kwekikalamba kuli mumalesbian ero n'amage abo ero kyashinikisha kukusya kitundu kikulu.
Brasky, 33, who wants to live in a desirable Manhattan apartment he shared for 11 years with Leslie Blanchard. The two men were considered a lifetime couple and spouses by their friends.
Kanshi kyashinikishe ikintu kikulu mu America okutira olutambulo olukulu lwakubalira ko mwifundi okusuminisha ababa nenso okuba mu bwampano ero mulichi muli uyo Magyo ero na Brasky.
Blanchard, the owner of a Manhattan beauty salon, died in September of 1986, leaving Brasky almost $5 million. Soon afterward, the landlord, Stahl Associates, attempted to evict Brasky on ground that he had no right to continue living in the below-price apartment because he was not related to Blanchard by blood, marriage, or adoption.
Blanchard afuire umwine wa saloon mu 1986 asha branch no ndalama nalimo $5 million. Awo apopene umwine wanganda afuire kupoka okufumya okutira talingire okutwalirira takwete n'ensambu kutwalira okwikala muri iki kikulwa ena alingire okuba mu nkyendere yakyepako.
Third subject in 1989 that made the year a turning point.
Kanshi kisambirwe ekikulu kyalenga omwaka wa 1989 okuba epa kwalukira kwa fintu.
Andrew Sullivan is a gay journalist.
Kanshi uyo Andrew Sullivan ni journalist eriyo ni gay.
And on August 28 of 1989 he wrote an article.
Eriyo mu August 28, 1989 alilembera eri ashire pepala
in the New Republic.
Eriyo mu New Republic.
Now, Andrew Sullivan was kind of a conservative.
Andrew Sullivan adi conservative rubali rumbi.
But he's homosexual and he changed party affiliation around the Iraq War.
Lero ni homosexual eriyo alichinjishe rubali lwakulwirako.
He wrote this article that is recognized as a turning point.
He wrote
another article actually in 2015. If we have time, we'll read from that one as well. The 1989 article was titled, "Here Comes the Groom, a Conservative Case for Gay Marriage." He says, "The gay movement has ducked this issue primarily out of fear of division. Much of the gay leadership clings to notions of gay life as essentially outsider, anti-bourgeois, radical. Marriage for them is co-optation into straight society. For the Stonewall generation, it is hard to see how this vision of conflict will ever fundamentally change. But for many other gays, my guess a majority, while they don't deny the importance of rebellion 20 years ago and are grateful for what was done, there's now the sense of a new opportunity. A need to rebel has quietly ceded to a desire to belong."
Luendo lwa gay awolwena lwabikwa mumulandu wa kubalirapo kufuma mu mwenso abengi amage abamutungulushi bana mbatira kwitontonganira ngusha kutira ubumi wa muntu abanige awo bwena bwali bakunse kabiri bwali ba wapusanako ichupo chabo kyalibe kya kusanako kayita kyalungama n'ekyupo ky'abantu aba bashiri mage kanshi mu nshita ya Stonewall kwali ukupiriuka kwa fintu
I think we
ifingi
will have examples soon to show his point is quite correct.
kanshi bwangu fetola kwata ifya kumwenako ikirangiro kyakwe kiri ikikomo kyakwe kiri kikankala.
Many homosexuals in 1989 were opposed to gay marriage.
Abengi ba homosexual mu 1989 bale kwata okutalikako ku kyupo ky'amage.
Because they wanted to fight society, not be co-opted into it.
Pamulanda wakabati balefo okulwisha abantu mu kyalo ifyo
But
bekala
this is a
balanda.
behavior that's really typical of civil rights movements.
Kanshi ikiye kyakumwerako nakuli bali abalelwisha fensambu.
There's a quite parallel fight within feminism.
Kanshi kuliko fimo ifipalene omuli
The women that fought through
Valerie
the
Shensambu.
sexual revolution and second wave feminism
nsambu shabana makanshi ababa imine okulwisha nsambu shabana mayo omuli okukunku wa
often
kibiri
fight today with today's feminists, this newest generation of feminists.
ndionse kulaba okukwata okukusanako omuli ababa balelwisha ensambu shabana mayo erero.
And the conflict is those older feminists fought so hard against society.
N'obusano bwakutira bali abalwishisha bakale ekiri ensambu kunuma balwishisha sana okulwisha mu kati akafya abantu bayikala.
Fought so hard under the sexual revolution to even have their female sexuality recognized.
Eyo balwishisha pakalamba kwakutira fye bakwate fye okutira bana maina bena babeshi bikwati bantu.
They've then watched the Me Too generation.
Hello balolesha nomba pankulo nomba shibiri na limwe
And
shapita.
the Me Too generation says the sexual revolution was important and good.
Eyo balolesha okutira
But it
ichupo
also has been used by men to see women as so sexually available.
okwamba bampana mu chupo kyali fye kyayishibikwa ero abawume bali bonfya.
It has added
And
to
my own
the
gift, Sologero.
fetishization and sexualization of women.
Munshire yakubula bana mayo okubabika fe okutira bena fisolobero fyakulala namo.
And they see some of the results of that when they raise their hand and say, Me too.
Eyo bachimoneki nokulolesha iyo balelosha paba aimye okuba okutira
The
naine
older
pani
feminists say,
profile.
do you not appreciate what we fought for?
Kanshi yu abakale bale abana abalwiri obulu bwansamusha bana mabale bisheta mule
And they
tulolesha
criticized the Me Too movement.
okutira twali tulire sana okulwisha pali shinsambu ero balolesha pali abalanda
So this is
naine.
what I referred to before about different currents within the stream of feminism.
Kanshi fyefyo ndero shako ero nalanda okutira mwali fintu ifya pusana ifya titike mukatika fye kabale lwire ensambu shabana mai.
The refinement of the message as we look back at the sexual revolution and see its positives and its negatives.
Kanshi muli fintu fya lekana itu twalolesha muli iyi movement kutira muli fintu fyali ibituntulu ero nefiri fya kusanako shiribwe.
Because that's an external fight.
Pamulandi wakwe bati ubulu bwakunse.
So the same thing is, parallel thing is happening when it comes to gay rights.
Kabiri fintu fimo fine fili fya palana file chitika ile chaisa kukulwisha ensambu sha mage.
In the next paragraph, he talks about the complication of domestic partnerships and why marriage is better.
Eyo muipe chikomo chimbi chikongerepo alanda pa fyali fya pikinkana muli milandu ya pamulandu wa chupo
Third
chaba.
paragraph that I've listed here. As it has become more acceptable for gay people to acknowledge their loves publicly, more and more have committed themselves to one another for life in full view of their families and their friends. Those conservatives who deplore promiscuity among some homosexuals should be among the first to support it.
kanshiro chaisabe cha ishibikono okupokerera okutira abantu b'amagye nabo bayishibika okutira bayishibikwa abo bena bayipereshe nomba balwalala kuli umo n'omunanko kufika na kumfa kuleka nendukwa shabo shimone
Whenever you
nefukusa
drive
fyabo
people underground, it's going to create an unhealthy culture.
kanshi ilio bachitefi chalalanga kundu kweshina ngu abantu bamikalirefi chintu
This
ichamonekanga
is when people talk about the gay culture.
ini shitanombeyo abantu balanda pakwe bati isho bekalafi bali amage mumikalire
We
yabo
have to realize what develops when you drive people underground.
kanshi tulingire okutuluka n'okumona ilio mwasunka abantu baya mukubelama.
His last argument, the argument that gay marriage would subtly undermine the unique legitimacy of straight marriage is based upon a fallacy. Gay marriage could only delegitimize straight marriage if it were a real alternative to it, and this is clearly not true. To put it bluntly, there's precious little evidence that straights could be persuaded by any law to have sex with, let alone marry, someone of their own sex. The only possible effect of this sort would be to persuade gay men and women who force themselves into heterosexual marriage, often at appalling cost to themselves and their families, to find a focus for their family instincts in a more personally positive environment. But this is clearly a plus, not a minus. Gay marriage could both avoid a lot of tortured families and create the possibility for many happier ones. It is not, in short, a denial of family values. It is an extension of them.
kanshi okukana kwa bubiri palichi alanda okutira kyali chintu ikyali kyakususha kabiri kyapusanako mukukalifya mukukana okupusana ku chupo kya abanensu abashiri ba homosexual elio alandi okutira eki kyabufi ichupo kyamagena chena kyalife ng'echupo ky'abanensu aba bashiri mage kabiri kyalife ekituntulu nshirafe ituntulu
He carries on to argue that a civilized society does not persecute minorities.
elio kyabikirwa efyokutira abantu abenga basambye tabalingirire kupakasa abantu
And
abandi
therefore, given the fact that we already allow legal gay relationships, what possible social goal is advanced by framing the law to encourage these relationships to be unfaithful, undeveloped, and insecure?
ero mulifi kutira mukulosha mulifi chiringire fe kyabafe okuba batishinka kuleka twalangisha
So as he states, he's making a conservative argument.
kanshinga efyo firandiro alepanga amashuwe
But it was
ayamukulosha kutira
considered
ni
a turning
conservative
point argument.
lero mulifi yali ni nshita ya kwalukiramo kwa fintu muri uyu mwaka
One more event in the United States
ekintu kimwe
sparked this
nakimbi kyakitike mu
September
America
of 1989.
mu mwaka wa September 1989
The State Bar Association of California
okulosha ku
it
Kiputulwa
urged
cha California.
recognition of marriages before even homosexuals. It urged recognition of marriages between homosexuals even before gay rights advocates adopted the issue.
ena bakwete okusuminisha ifyupo fyaba nenso amage iyo tabara kwata fenefunde
Now we're going to
okusuminisha
move
iki
outside the United States.
lokabiri twarakwata okufuma kunsi ya chalo cha America.
Now we're going to Germany, East Germany.
Hapa nomba twalaya ku Germany
So we've been to
bali
Denmark, 3 events in the United States. Now we're going to East Germany.
hapa twalaya ku Germany.
By 1989, Germany has been divided for 41 years.
Kanshi 1989 Germany ni shali beya lekanishiwa pa miaka 49.
And as you might expect, homosexuals and lesbians were persecuted by the secret police.
Kanshi ifyupo na ba homosexual bali aba patrushanya
But
kuli
there was
bakapokola.
one fellow who no longer wanted to be homosexual in secret.
Lero kulipo omuntu umo uwo afikire pa kumuna kutilanisha twalilyo kuba homosexual wa munkama iyo.
His name is Matthias Freehoff.
Ishina lyakwe anima Caius Free
One of the last films made by the East German State Film Studio was called Coming Out.
Kanshi ifilmu ya kurekeshe iyo ba pangirelia itiko kutila kunenimo.
So even in that environment, the East German Film Studio produced this movie.
Kanshi namuli iyo nshiteyo tachali chavanguka. Ichi chubombera kupanga mafilimu bafumishe
With Matthias as the lead actor.
iyo yo Matayanga solo muri ubo bwangalo.
It was also his personal coming out.
Iyo chali kabiri kuluba liferwa kwenge chituntu lifera lefumamu.
On November 9 of 1989.
Ero kufumamu kwakwe kwabuli pa November 9, 1989.
So after 41 years of separation,
Kanshi panuma ya miaka 41 ya patrushanya.
Gay-themed film they make.
Ukubalira kwa kulangisha
came out on
mage.
November 9 of 1989.
Muri filmu iyo bafumishe.
A short distance from the Berlin Wall.
November 9, 1989 ukulangisha ukwampana pamo nokuwa kwa
It received
Berlin.
such praise they played the premiere twice.
Yeah, such praise.
Yalipokelele okulumbanisha okukalamba sana.
So as they sat watching this premiere over the hours of midnight, they had no idea what was taking place down the road.
Kanshi mukulumbanisha okukwa chitiki apa. Nokutamba eri baletamba ifilimu.
As they came out of that premiere, they saw through the windows the cars and the people.
Kanshi iyo balefuma muri icho balosha pa window bamona abantu nama.
And Matthias tells the story of walking down to the border between East and West Germany.
Iyo balosha ya pale pa border pale Kenya East na West Germany.
It's seen also as a historical event and a turning point.
Kanshi nacho chali chintu chikalamba kabiri ngenshira.
Even separately to the timing of the double premiere.
Angula chali chamoneka cha kusana ko necho chale chitika.
So you see, in 1989, the fight begins.
Kanshi kuti mwamona mu 1989 ubuli bwatendeka.
But what did we understand from the document how the Constitution became Christian?
lero vinci vyo tuirukamo ile twaverenge pepara kutira ifyo constitution yasangwike ipepara
What inevitably is
lupapuro
going
lwavena
to
kristu
happen
okulosha kuli ifyo ifyatitiki
is going to be a backlash.
awo fyena fyalava vulwi kukalamba muli ififile
There's going
chitika
to be a fight.
walava vulwi kukalamba sana
It became a fight in 1991.
awe chali vulwi mu 1991
So I want to just deal of one issue of discrimination and then we'll get to the fight.
anxikandolexepo fye ukupatulula mchachinani wa chitikere tuye
This is from the New York
kulu
Times, 1991, October 6th.
kanxi chafuma mulupapulo lwa New York Times mu 1991
The Georgia
October
Attorney
6th.
General has withdrawn a job offer to a lawyer after learning that she planned a wedding ceremony with her lesbian lover. State law bans sexual relations between people of the same sex, and the Attorney General, Michael J. Bowers, had successfully defended that law 5 years ago before the United States Supreme Court.
kanxi Georgia umukalamba atoni afumye akana okupera nchito kuli uyo uloya owaishive kutira afuma mukwanxika nshida ya kupangilamo ukusefeshamo na nkupishamo echupo icho chakwa lesbian ero ifunde lyachalo iji lyakanya kutira ubu bwampano bwafi upwefi nangu ubu
Of
bwampano
course,
bwafi
Georgia
pakati
law
kabantu
also just does not recognize homosexual marriage.
bamo bene fyalileshiwa ni pamulando wakutira mubashirika ifyo tafyali ifyasuminishiwa eryo
But
nekoti
he
yacha
defended and kept a law on their books
lero ali chiluishishe nokuchingirira nokusunga lifunde mu mabuku yako
that made it illegal to be a practicing homosexual in Georgia.
ekyalengere kuti chibe chiyakusuminisha
But that
mwifunde
threat really begins in 1990.
okuba ba homosexual mu Georgia ero ekyakutinisha ekikalamba kyatendeke mu
The
1990
state heats up. And it begins in Hawaii.
eryo kyatendekere ku Hawaii
On December 17, 1990, 3 same-sex couples applied for marriage licenses at the Hawaii Department of Health.
eryo pa 17 December mu 1990 abantu batatu bakwete okulembera kutira tulefwaya amapepala yakusuminisha kuchipani cha bumi mu
I
Hawaii.
suspect they anticipated being denied.
Ndiye baletontonganya kutira palifi
So
kwenda
they
baleta
initiated a lawsuit.
bena babikire kutwala ekyo kubonfya
May 1st of 1991.
eryo mu 1991
And this lawsuit went all the way up to the Supreme Court of Hawaii.
eryo iri ichefunde ekicho bayimishe kyatwerwe kwikoti likalamba
It
eryamwawa
was known as Bayer versus Lewin.
eryo kyayitiro n'okushibika okutira baya mukulwana
They ended up suing the state of Hawaii for the legal right to marry.
bena bakwete okupera kyalo kya Hawaii pamulandi wakukanya ekicho bashitire
Touching again on what we spoke about before,
okwikata kabiri ku fintu ifyo tulandirepo kale
that this desire for gay marriage was not uniform through the homosexual community.
okulosha pafyupo fya ba homosexual tafyali kutira bakwete fe bonse ba muri ba
You may
homosexual
have heard
mofini
of BEMBA. Legal Defense and Education Fund.
kololesha
It's the American civil rights organization that focuses on lesbian, gay, LGBT people.
Kuli icho chibungwe chiloesha pali ababantu aba LGBT.
Lambda refused to represent them in court.
Uyulam akene okubemanina ko mukoti.
Because for two reasons.
Pamulandu wa ishishibiri.
They doubted whether taking the issue to court was a wise strategy.
Bale tuishika kutira ukutwale chikukoti shinishire ituntulifi.
And they debated the importance of marriage itself.
Ero kabiri bakwete chabubiri kulanda no tarikana festi okuloresha kachupo chine chamage.
So when these three couples went to court, the civil rights organization that were meant to represent them refused.
Kanshirio awa upanaba batatu baile kutwala umulandu utubungo twalingire kubemanina.
But others took up the case. In 1993, the Supreme Court of Hawaii ruled.
In 1993, ichipani chamwa koti kalambea mu Hawaii ya kwetu
for this, I'll just paraphrase. It's considered the first major judicial victory for same-sex marriage activists.
Kanshi chala ndio kutira chintu icho chatike chikalamba kulosha kufyupo fyama
ge. It wasn't much of a victory.
Eyo okolosha vitachali chakula sana ati chikulu mungu chimfya.
The Supreme Court looked at the rules that had been based on racial classifications.
Kanshi ikoti yaloleshe pali lemilandu na fintifilosha paku patura kwa mitundu.
They acknowledged that all their past rules on racial classifications were unconstitutional.
Eri baloleshe kutira ifyonse filandu okulosha kukanya abapusanenkanida tafyali ifyasumishwa mu lupapula.
And they compared and contrasted that then with the laws on the state books regarding same-sex marriage.
Lero bampanya n'okupusanya n'amafunde ayo ayalanda pamulandu w'abantu abaawukana bamube.
And they considered that that position was also discriminatory.
Balolesha n'okulanda okutirawe muli mulandu n'efine fidifide.
But they didn't rule for same-sex marriage.
Kanshi ilangulushirya kupishia ifunde palicho.
What they did is they said to the state of Hawaii, if you're against same-sex marriage, your current laws and your state constitution do not prohibit it. So you need to consider, state of Hawaii, what kind of defense you want to make. Because your arguments of defense against these three couples are unsatisfactory. So they didn't really rule in favor of the couple. The state had time.
Kanshi imilandu iyalengere bawini omulandu paliri anshita.
And this terrified just about every other state in the United States.
Chasunkenye nabonse fye mufiputure fye alekanaleka mukataka America.
If Hawaii, which was dangerously close to legalizing same-sex marriage,
Kanshi ngefyo Hawaii chali cha usanso sana kusuminisha ififi upo fyaba nensu bamobene.
that makes everything complicated.
ekyalenga efintu fyonse okuba
If you're
fyakobenkana
a man and a woman in Arkansas,
nga kyakuba tuli mwaume n'omwana kashiiko wa kansawo
and you have family in California,
era walikwata olupwa ku California,
you might decide to fly to California and get married.
wewe okuti wa yane ndeke ku California
Then
nokuyawo
when you fly back to Arkansas, the state of Arkansas has to recognize your marriage.
ero ekyupo nga wabwerera ku Arkansas ekyalo kya Arkansas kiringire kyamono n'okusumina
So
ekyupo
if
kire
Hawaii
kyo
legalized gay marriage,
kanshi Hawaii nga kyakutira yasuminisha ekyupo kyamage
and a homosexual couple from Arkansas decide to fly to Hawaii and get married,
eryo baba upana ba homosexual nga baya ku kyalo
what
kya
is Arkansas required to
Arkansas
do?
kinshi kyo Arkansas eringire okuti
So that's panic number one.
kanshi kyo ikyalenga
Panic
okushupika
number
sana
two.
kushupika kwa
If
kubantu
Hawaii recognizes this couple as married,
ero kyakupamfya matontonkani kyabubi kyakutira Hawaii nga yasumisha ekiyikutira
what
kirifyo
then
buli
about the
kyupo
federal government?
kinshi kyala kitika kuli nomba obuteeka obutungulula efiifyalo fyonse mu
Because
America
there are a lot of things that the federal government is responsible for, not the state.
eyo kwaliwo efintu ifingi ifyo obuteeka nomba obukalamba obulosha pafyalo fyonse mu America
So if
tabulingire
you're a
kupanga
member of the
omugusi
armed forces
kanshi nga kuti mwayibukisha abali abalosha
And
ku
you
nkondo
fly to
basirika
Afghanistan and fight,
eyo kuli uli mu Afghanistan
and you die in Afghanistan,
eyo afiira mu Afghanistan
it's the federal government that needs to notify your family, your husband or wife.
kanshi buteeka obukalamba bulosha kwishuba ikina lyobe
So it's
lukwalo
said
obe
that
n'abakashi
there's
n'abaana
hundreds, maybe thousands of ways the federal government interacted with a couple's marriage, not the state.
kanshi kwali nshira iyo ukuteeka obukalamba pamulolesha n'okwampana n'olukwalo akwayo mushirika n'abakashina
So everyone's watching Hawaii from 91 to 93.
kanshi bonse fengayo balelesha mwishiro mu 1991 okufika mu 1993
And it didn't end up going that well for opponents of same-sex marriage.
kanshi tacha bwire bwino okulosha kuli abo abakwata efiupo fimufini
So when there is a group threat,
kanshi nga kwaba lyonse ibumba lireta
what
obusanzu
do?
kinshi bumulingire okukita
You mobilize.
kuyikolonganya na kabiri kuyibika bwino
Define the Constitution
okwesha okulondolola constitution
and the law in ways that protect you from the group threat.
eryo nefunde okulyondolera munshireyo kuibumba
And when
eryo
would you expect that
okunyikiringanya
response to be formalized?
era muri ifyo okumona enshira iyo fyala abikirwamo pamo
Answer as a member of the movement.
nga ifwe nga liba membera ba movement
1996.
mu mwaka wa
They've
1996
mobilized. They've formed their counter arguments.
bayibika pamo eryo bapanga ekibungwe kyakutaalika kuli ififya kitiki
Going back to the document of quotes.
okuberera kuli lipepala n'okwambulamu
Georgia Representative Bob Barr, then a Republican, authored the Defense of Marriage Act and introduced it in the House of Representatives on May 7, 1996. Senator Don Nichols of Oklahoma then introduced the bill in the Senate.
kanshi injiminishi ya mu Georgia Bob Barr ena pali yonstari mu Republican ena imishe kyakuchingirira ichupo omulandu wa chupo n'okuleeta mu nganda y'amafunde pa May 7, 1996 eryo Senator Don
This is what
Nichols
is known as DOMA.
ewa chilondolo eno mba mu seneta echo betati chitokutira lupapulo
Third
lwakwadde
paragraph. The 1996 Republican Party platform endorsed DOMA. The Democratic Party platform that year did not mention DOMA or same-sex marriage at all.
Kachi mu 1996 chiputula chama Republican chasuminishe doma elio kabiri ma Democrat tabakwete bena muri uyo mwaka okuchitana
The bill
okulondola
moved
pali
through
icho.
Congress on a legislative fast track and met with overwhelming approval in both houses of the Republican-controlled Congress on July 12 of 1996, with only 65 Democrats and then Representative Bernie Sanders, who was an independent, and Representative Steve Gunderson, who was a Republican in opposition.
Elio ilivi uyumulandulio waendele mu Congress na munganda ya mafundio mubwangu nokumanya ukusuminishiwa munga mayanda yonse abiri aya Milan pa 12 July 1996 kufumia kofe Democrats wali 65 elio na Bernie Sanders wali waiminine kanaumbi Steve Gunderson.
So it's authored by a Republican.
Kanshi chatendeke na Republican.
It's introduced by a Republican.
Ero chatungiri chaleto manda ya
Passes
mafunde
through a
Republican.
Republican-controlled House.
Ero chapita no pita munganda kuma Republican.
Passes through a Republican-controlled Senate.
Ero yapita kabiri na kuma Republican ni senator.
But who is president?
Domba president hapa ni nani?
Democrat.
O Democrat.
This is an article by the New York Times in 2013.
Ilili paper la didi ya shidi ya rembele ba New York Times in 2013.
He had just flown across the country after an exhausting campaign day in Oregon and South Dakota, landing at the White House after dark. But President Bill Clinton still had more business before bed. He picked up a pen and scrawled out his name, turning a bill into law.
Kanshi afuma ve fuma kucharo chimbi na ana kamu kuwesha kupanga bu campaign Oregon ina South Dakota afika fe munganda yakwe ya chalo ubushiku uyu Bill Clinton president yena nakwata ko mulimo na umbi uno ile tararara
It was 10 minutes before 1 a.m. on Saturday of September 21, 1996, and there were no cameras, no ceremony. The witching hour timing bespoke both political calculation and personal angst. With his signature, federal law now defined marriage as the union of a man and a woman. Mr. Clinton considered it a gay-baiting measure, but was unwilling to risk re-election by vetoing it.
Kanshi na bula fepeni yako no kusaina ibiu kuisangule funde elio asaina po national elo chali nalimo ama minutes feteni iyo 01 ile da Saturday 21 September 1996 takwali naba kukopa takwali no kusefia takwali ala ndile fiefi mumashu yakwe icho aletina kwako baterusa ma election ayo ayalabako ngusara kwambwekesha.
It's understood that if he had vetoed it, it still would have gone through because he had so little support in Washington by that time.
Kutile chupo chawa hepa mwa omeno mwana kashi eri na kubanango aletechi ngachako etefie kutungilirwa panono pali yanshita.
But by vetoing it, he still would have sent a message.
Ero nangwa wakwate okulete okutalika kwa ngali tumine na kabiri amashu ya
What did we
mwe.
learn about the Whig Party?
Nomba chinshi tulesa mbirira pali ye bumbali lya
What do you do in an election year?
Nisho lingiri okuchita ilio limu mwaka wa kusala.
The end, winning the election, justifies the means, compromise.
Kanshi webo alakwata kupita mumaya ukusalwa pamulandi wakwe bati wa sengulu
Nearly
ile
17 years since, that middle of the night moment has haunted Mr. Clinton, the source of tension with friends, advisors, and gay rights supporters. He tried to explain, defend, and justify, He asked for understanding. Then he inched away from it bit by bit. Finally, this month, 2013, he disavowed the Defence of Marriage Act entirely, urging that the law be overturned by the Supreme Court. Rarely has a former president declared that an action he took in office violated the Constitution.
Kanshina limwe myaka 17 yapita okufumapo lebuli obushiko bwa sayinine kyalibe kyakulolosha Clinton okolosha kufibusa kuli bale mu palama na bonse bale tungire ensambu shamage ayese shokulondolole kino nokusuminisha eryo airuka muri ifi nokumona okutira mu myesha konkerepo kutira koti pili bulefyo kutira ekyupota kyabefyo lero nga president
So historically, Bill Clinton had quite a number of homosexual friends.
alolesha okutira china fena alitobera olupapulo lwa kyalo eryo alikwedde ifibusa
and he'd been seen relative for his time as progressive and supportive of the community.
Ifya ama homosexuals eryo muri yonsta tumwene nokutira ndekutira ale tungire nokukoseresha.
But early in his presidency, he tried to open up the military to gays and lesbians.
Lero mukutendeka kwa bukateka alikwete okuisula
politically that had a negative impact for him.
Eyo asuminishe okutira atali bafyo lero.
So by 1996, he's afraid of the consequences if he vetoes DOMA.
Kanshi akwete okulosha tawe kulosha kufikansa fya kyalo na kwate okulusa kashi mu 1996 akwete okulosha nokumona chilingire okutisuminishe.
The bill passed with overwhelming margins, enough to override a veto. So his veto wouldn't have mattered.
Kanshi biu yali kwata okupokererwa no kusuminisha mu.
At least for as far as passing the law is concerned.
Kuli vote lya ishire lya kutalika ekirero lyapita chapita chena pamuru.
He hoped to avoid calling attention to it with his post-midnight signature. Mike McCurry, the press secretary, got a call at home asking if they should wait until morning to announce it.
Kanshi alefa ishokutira limbi kuti kwaba okukanya kulolesha kuli ichi kulosha ku uli uyo bushiku bwa sayine ero imaki awa eseshewa ni secretary aishe
press secretary from the time, his posture was quite frankly driven by the political realities of an election year in 1996.
Wani secretary aishe kumutumina fone kutira limbi tutsunge tolere mairo chero kuleka mukabilisha awo kulosha kwako kwalifyo kwalangisha okutira ifyo alechi tempa mulandu wa mwaka wa mu election.
They did feel betrayed.
Kanshi bamo amage bakwete okufurwa sana
not wishing to change subject, but that wasn't his only compromise to win that election.
Kanshi chalife kulosha pali chisambiro chali chakusengwe pakoleka wine fye ama election.
The other act that he signed is the illegal immigration reform.
Ero ifunde limbiri yasayine kumono kutira balabale isa kwabula insambu 1996.
An Immigrant Responsibility Act of 1996.
Eri no kumona okutira balingire okukanishiwa mwaka wa 1996.
That act on immigration has negatively affected the southern border for the decades since.
Eryo yaine fundero yasayine jali leto obusanso okufika nerero okufuma mu 1996.
So before we close, I just want to explain what DOMA is.
Anshiro tatula isara ndefo okulondolola ife chipilibula doma chinshi.
It's a really short bill.
Kanshi ni bill yipi sana.
It's only 2 pages.
Yakwata pepala yabiri.
And consists of 3 sections.
Ero yakwata fe ifiputulu afitatu.
The first section consists of nothing more than the name.
Nchiputule chakubalira pofe yakwaita fe ishina
It's
fie.
just an explanation of the name.
Okulondolera fe ishina.
So it's fairly meaningless as far as the impact of the law is concerned. Section 2 and 3.
Eryo ichipando cha bubiri na cha
Section
butatu.
2 says that no state has to acknowledge a same-sex marriage that was performed in another state.
Ichipando chawe chaenda kutira takuli ichalo state ilingire kusumisha chupo
So
ichasumishiwa
this is a response to Hawaii.
kuchiputulwa chimbi kanshi chakwasuka kucha
So
chitike mu
Hawaii
Hawaii.
was to legalize same-sex marriage.
Kanshi chinshi Hawaii iyo yasumishe chupo cha kupana mage.
Arkansas would not recognize any of those couples as married.
Arkansas tailingire kusumisha ponangu chupo nangu chimo pali ifyo kutira
Once
fyupo.
they stepped foot in Arkansas.
Kana fefya wikwa muri ya mwine mwakazo.
So this protected the states.
Nanshi ifya likuchingirira ama states.
Section 3,
Ichipando chalenga butatu.
equally as simple.
Yena yalife yanguka.
The federal government does not recognize as married
Uteko ukalamba nombo wa pamundu tabusumirisho kuno kumona kutire chichupo.
any gay couple legally married by a state that allows it.
Ichupo chiri chonse cha chichika mu state kutira chamage.
So one was to protect the states, one was to protect the federal government.
Kanshi ifunderimo iya
The
kuchingirira
federal government
states.
recognizes that marriage only exists between a man and a woman.
Eyo uteko ukalamba na bwalo shokutira chupo cha pakati kama ome no mwana kashi.
And it's an action to defend marriage due to the recent events.
Kanshi yadi yakuchingirira ichupo kupusana kulia ifefya
It's a legal
lechtiko.
response to the group threat.
Kanshi echa suikwe kulia mabumba ya leleta usanso.
So I'm going to review before we close.
Kanshi ndefo kusha nefyo.
The first presentation, I wanted to explain why we're discussing this subject.
Kanshi mtsambi cha kubaya nandio kutia mula ndushi tulilandira pali fisambiri.
Remind us of some of our history,
Okutuyukisha kuli fimwe fyo muli history.
particularly how we have understood these three issues of racism, worship, and gender.
Okwesho kulosha muli yamali ya tatu. Kulosha kuli racism, sexism,
As they
race and
become
gender.
testing points for God's people post 1798.
Eyo ukulosha ngecha kwesha icha bantu bakwalesa panuma ya 1798.
Recognizing that we must understand the external events
Ero nokwishiwa kutira tulingire twakata okutuluka nokwiruka
and the
ifintu
institutions of
fidechitika
evil.
kunse kulya eryo nefibungwe isho tulimu.
Threading our waymarks, we went back to 1989.
Kanshi okulosha nokukonka omushiro wesu wa kubukuluka twabwerere ku 1989.
Recognizing it as a turning point.
Okumonanga apa kwalukira.
Where gay marriage became a possibility, an external subject in mainstream media.
Chaishireva kutire chupo chamage chambo kuba kunse nokulandwa po kumilonga ya kunse kuli.
A key subject on the night of November 9, just by the Berlin Wall.
kanshi ekisamiriro kimu kyabanga enfungulo kikankala pa 1989 November okulosha kuli
Denmark, the first country in the world to legally recognize those relationships.
okulosha kukuwa kwa Berlin Wall. Denmark nayo ekyalo kyabalirepo okusuminisha wampano
The
obw'abantu
arguments by
ab'amagye
journalists that were astounding for the time gained a lot of traction.
anshi uyo ali ni journalist owabalirepo okuleka abantu bakwate okwalukira n'okumana kuliki
In the actions in California and New York City.
okulosha kufya kitike mu New York California.
This one being called the most important single step forward in American law.
Iki kyayitibwa kutira ekintu kimu kyali kyakulisha mu kyalo kya America lutampulo lwakubalira
Towards legal recognition for same-sex people.
okulosha kukusuminisha kwa nsambusha chupo cha kupana pa gay
Fight heating up in the state of Hawaii.
ero kuwelera mu 1991 ku kyalo kya Hawaii
Galvanized national attention.
ikyaletere kabiriyo ikyalo kyokuloleshapo kya America
Frightened the rest of the United States in 93.
ero kyasunkenye n'okutinya ama states yonse abamu America mu 1993
And a counterattack formalized in 1996.
eryo n'abakutaalika n'omuboogwisa kanefi babikwa pa bayireeta n'okwisisunkanya mu
The DOMA
1996
Act signed by a compromising Democrat.
ero neyi doma iri ensambusha kulondolera kwekiyasayinwe n'amademocrats
That stopped other states from having to recognize same-sex marriages in another state.
ekyo kyakwete okukalifya amastates yambi ayasuminishe ifyupo
We
fyama
have the federal government
homosexuals ero apana tukwata
state that marriage only existed between a man and a woman.
ero apana mba twakwata okuteeka obukalamba obuli pamulu palya bwasumisha okutirayo ekyupo kyafipa baume n'obaana kashi
When we come back tomorrow, we'll start with 2001.
eryo nga twabwera mairo tukesa tendekera pa 2001
If you're near with me, we'll close in prayer.
kuti mwafukama naine twalayisalira mwepepo
Dear Lord,
kikulu wesu wate mwiko
pray, Lord, that we will see the importance of history.
twewo tulepepo kutira twalamuna obukankala bwalya shiryapita
That we will divide history
okutira twalakanya history
correctly,
bwino shinga
interpret history correctly,
ero n'okwirura history bwino mu kishinga
and understand what it has to teach us.
ero n'okwiruka ifyo ikwete okutufunda ife
As we go and consider these subjects,
anshire tuleya n'okutontonkanya pali ekisambiriro
tracing these events,
okwesha okubebeeta n'okumuna
pray,
ifyo
Lord, that you will
kandu
grant us
yakita
the wisdom,
ndepepo okutira wala tupeera kwiruka n'okulosha bwino ifyakushinjirira
bless the other speakers,
paleni n'abambi bakasambirisha
and the leaders also running this camp meeting.
kwata okuwomba n'okukulonga
Bless the efforts behind the scenes,
paleni n'amaka yabikirwe kulifa
that it might be a blessing to all.
kuleka libe lipaalo okuli bonse
We pray this in Jesus' name.
bapepere efi mu ishina lya kwa Yesu
Amen.
amen